We are live here on the MMA Industry Podcast, August 3rd edition, and I'm your host, as always, James Lynch. And I know I've been off for a few weeks, but when I come back after a hiatus like this, I got to come back with a big guest, and we certainly have one here today. And of course, I'm talking about a writer for MMA Fighting and The Ringer. He's also a panelist on the MMA Beat. The man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, joining me here on the program. Chuck, how are you?
Good. How you doing, man? It's about time we did this.
I know it's been a while since we've talked. I last saw you, I believe, UFC 223 in New York. Briefly, we chatted there.
Yeah.
But I always start the show off with how my guests and I met. And you and I remember you came on my podcast years ago when I did the Parting Shot, back when it was just an audio podcast. But I think I met you in Montreal for the Demetrius Johnson and Horiguchi fight. I remember you were at that card. Yeah, we were there at the weigh-ins. They did the weigh-ins, or they did like a Q&A at some theater hall or something. George St. Pierre was there and Rory McDonald was there. Do you remember this?
I do actually remember that. That was about as big as it gets that weekend, man. That card was huge, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Well, I mean, yeah. Well, the card itself was didn't do so well.
No,
but
I know.
Just obviously the having Rory and George there, and I remember distinctly at that Q&A how different it was, like seeing George go on and then seeing Rory, and it's like, God bless Rory, great fighter, but he just didn't really captivate the crowd the way George did. It was kind of like showing the differences between the two, if you remember that.
Oh, I do actually remember that. And at the time, obviously, we were all anointing Rory McDonald as the next GSP in Canada, like the next big thing in Canada. So I do actually remember that. It's funny you kind of blend a lot of these events together, but all it takes is one person with a good memory, and that would be you in this case, and it always kicks right back in, man.
For sure. So let's start all the way at the beginning. Where did you where did your interest in sports first start? Where did it all begin? And how soon after did MMA come on the radar?
So, man, this is I've been kind of writing in some form or another for 20 years now, man. I've been doing it actually a little bit even more than that. Even going back to my college days, I used to write for the school paper. I always had an enjoyment of reading and communication in that sense, in the written word, and wanted to connect that way, the other way, which made me want to be a writer at some point along the way. But I didn't really start doing it until the college paper, a little bit here and there. And then I took a couple years out of college, basically to, I was waiting tables, things like that. And then you realize, like, maybe I should really give this thing a full look and see if I can make anything of it. And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, and I just started working at this place called LA Parent at the time. It was like a parenting place, and I was just doing their little blurbs and stuff like that. And that led to a kind of internship at LA Weekly, and then LA Weekly being like an alternative news weekly out there. That was big at the time. They had a lot of great writers there at the time, and being around those people and everything kind of got me rolling. I went through multiple departments there, basically, and I ended up proofreading and writing a lot about music, which is a very strange thing to think about now. But I went through that route, man, and there's like I said, there were so many great writers. Manola Dargis from the Times was there, Greg Burke, Charles Rapley. There was, I mean, the names went on and on and on. Jonathan Gold, who won the Pulitzer, just passed away. All these people are just in the building at all times, and you're seeing them. You got their energy. You're seeing how good they are as writers, and it really made me read in a different sense and want to kind of write in that sense as well. Like kind of be just bigger than I was doing. I didn't want to just be a journalist. At that point, you wanted to be more of a writer, and that kind of just parlayed, man, ultimately into multiple other things. Long story short, I moved to New York at some point after I think I was at Daily Weekly for about 4 years, all told, and moved to New York, and I kind of freelanced doing a lot of music stuff because that's where I kind of had my a little bit of a foot in the door. So I was doing stuff for Blender magazine, which was a kind of it was internet. It was almost like the internet now, but it was a magazine form. It was kind of cool. I did some stuff for Rolling Stone, just all over the place. And so I kind of started to feel like I was catching momentum. Entertainment Weekly, I was writing some rap reviews for, which was really funny to think back on too now. Basically, that got me used to dealing with editors, honestly, like different kinds of editors, different kinds of expectations. And from there, man, tell me if I'm getting too long-winded as well.
No,
Like,
no, no. Be as long-winded as you want. Whatever you got to say, you got to say. So I'm willing to listen, because this is interesting to me, because, you know, the traditional path of the MMA journalist is definitely not this one, but that's what makes it so cool.
100%. And I feel like most people, especially in our game, especially in mixed martial arts, came from very strange backgrounds, because you know, it's kind of like the light and all the moths kind of flew to it when it started to boom. But that was kind of the way it worked for me. I freelanced, and then at some point, I got a job offer to return to California and be the editor-in-chief of another alternative news weekly called the IE Weekly, which is the Inland Empire Weekly. It covers Riverside and San Bernardino Valley and, you know, et cetera, like that big expanse of inland Los Angeles, you know, all the way to the border, basically. And so I took that, went back out there, and that was actually where I feel like I did my, you know, that's where I really, really took hold on what in the writing sense, because we didn't have a huge budget, man. I had some good writers there, but that I was overseeing, and we were putting out the paper, and it was a good product, man. Considering, you know, it was very good, but I would end up writing, I don't know, a dozen things in that thing just to fill page space. So I'm doing everything, movie reviews, you know, et cetera, like for everything, you know, culture stories, interviewing, you know, tattoo artists, things like that, just people all around, and just writing and writing and writing. And then when I was done with that, I'd be editing and putting the paper together and, you know, going through that whole process. So I was kind of wearing all hats, pardon my pun. I was doing everything there. And eventually, man, so it was there that Dan Henderson and Quentin Jackson were both in the area. And that was right before, I think it was UFC 77. I'd been a peripheral fan, essentially. You know, I would call myself a casual fan, but I certainly was not a diehard fan back then. I knew that they were going to fight. I knew they were basically, you know, maybe 50 miles from each other. And Temecula being part of our coverage area, I started writing about Dan Henderson a little bit, just kind of given like a sense. I thought fighting is kind of a cultural event, more so, like sporting and cultural. I was like, it's kind of both things. So it was perfect for our paper. And so I just did some blurbs and stuff, and that was fun. I really enjoyed it. You know, it was like writing about fighting and paying attention to it on a level. I started to really dig that. But I didn't think anything about segueing into you know, that kind of writing at all. But basically, Dan Henderson's next fight was against Anderson Silva at UFC 82, and then that one, I went more full on. I was like, let's do a whole lead up. Let's do a cover story on him. Let's do all this stuff. So we did like this lead up for Dan Henderson. I visited him in Big Bear. I went to Temecula, and just kind of did a weekly type journal that would run in this culture section of the paper. And I ended up like, so for the cover part, I was like, let's do it in reverse. Like, I'm going to go to the event, and then we'll write about it as an experience coming out of it. So I went to the event in Columbus, hung out with him there. I did this it was like my first big in-depth profile piece on a fighter like that. And I loved it, man. Like, being there and seeing that event, and you know, being part of Dan's camp, and meeting Anderson Silva's camp at the time, and just, you know, seeing the kind of respect, but sort of the seething hatred underneath it all. And I realized at that point, man, and even before then, but I grew up, I should point out, I grew up reading all the great boxing chroniclers and all the great sports writers and things like that. I did read a lot of that stuff. So this had long been in my head to maybe figure out a path to writing about sports, but I didn't really want to write about football or baseball as much. It just, it was too inundated. The market was too inundated. And I was like, fighting was just coming up at this point. It was really at that moment where it was really taking off. So all that in consideration for context, I did that piece. I did a cover story. It was a lot of fun. A lot of people saw it, including our friend Thomas Gerbasi over at UFC.com.
Nice.
And I don't remember if I sent it to him now or if somehow he just saw it. But at any rate, we talked, and he was like, "Would you want to write a couple things for the site over there?" And I was still editing the paper, so I was like, "Sure, you know, why not? Just talk to some fighters and do little profiles, you know." Kind of innocent through the whole process of the UFC, honestly, of how the UFC is ran, and you know, everything that kind of goes on at the UFC at the time. But that was kind of the first thing I did. The Dan Henderson thing, did a couple things for Gerbasi at UFC.com. I probably did that for about 6 months, maybe, and then Fight magazine was rolling at the time, and multiple other things, but Fight magazine, there's a couple of weird, like there was a magazine that was going to start in New York that had talked to me about editing that, and I was really excited about that because I was like, well, if I'm going to leave, maybe I would want to be an editor at an MMA magazine and oversee it. And I think they were going to call it MMA Rage or MMA Cage. I don't remember now, but it was the same people who put out Slam magazine. It was a big outfit, and so they had, like, I visited them in New York. Their first thing they wanted was a Brock Lesnar cover, and so I flew out, hung out with Brock Lesnar in Alexandria, Minnesota at the time where he lived. Put the piece together, but when I came back and I was writing it, I realized they weren't going to launch. It was like, you know how it is in our industry. It's like one thing here one day, and next thing it's gone. So that piece I placed in Fight Magazine instead. I sold it to Fight Magazine, and that was really where then it really started to take off, because the next thing I know, I guess they dug it enough where they were like, hey, why don't you do a cover story for us? And then, and then pretty soon I'm doing like basically every other cover story for them. I was doing cover stories for them. I've been folks. There was a lot of people at the time who were writing for that magazine. So it was kind of it was a known, if you recall, it was kind of known for, it had some good voices in there. So I started doing a lot of cover stories for them. And through this process, I had, as that process started going, at some point I quit IE Weekly. I said, I'm going to, give MMA a try, because I knew I could make it freelancing. I was like, let's do it, man. I've always loved sports. I love fighting. I realized how much, how many charms it had to cough up, and so why not try it? I went through that process. I was writing a lot for Fight Magazine. I was doing multiple other stuff, and I moved back to the East Coast, to Connecticut, and coincidentally, it wasn't strictly because of ESPN, but I was close to ESPN, and I had been in touch with the editor at the time, wrtiers, and basically it was coincidence in terms of ESPN was just about to launch basically an MMA presence on its site. So I was there right when they did that. I kind of coincided it to be there while they did that. So I was a part of that. Jake Rawson at the time they were just calling off of the SureDog content, and so they were bringing on actual guys. They still had MMA Live at the time with Franklin McNeil and John Anik and all those guys, but I came in there and I was like, I want to write though. I want to do, if I'm doing blogs, if you're going to call them blogs, they're going to be little bursts of literary madness. I'm going to like try to put stuff like this in there, and I kind of did that, honestly. They really let me do that stuff. So I started working at ESPN essentially from 2010 all the way to 2013. And this is just it's a long, crazy journey. You know what I mean? But I was able to do that at ESPN. Right when ESPN's involvement was and it's nowhere near what it is now, but it was just starting. We were giving it a presence. I thought it was a lot of fun. There was Chad Dundas was there, Josh Gross, Brett Okamoto. It was a good team. It was a lot of fun. And I contributed to that thing daily. I did the rankings. I did the MMA Live, the show there. And then I did stuff for the magazine. 2013 MMA Fighting. I think Chiappetta bolted for Fox, and they just approached me. This was kind of right in the moment when ESPN had a waning interest in MMA. So it was kind of ebb and flow, just like everything in the sport. And I just signed up in 2013 with MMA Fighting. And basically, in a nutshell, that's where I've been the last 5 years. So, and then the Ringer came along, whenever it launched in June, I think, of 2016. And I was the very first guy to run any freelance piece, like I wasn't a staffer. So it was like, I was the very first freelance piece on the site because of the Michael Bisping piece I did right before he upset Rockhold. And so, man, it's just been a lot of weird coincidences, certain leap in a net will appear type mentality things where you just do these things, and eventually I ended up here. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how it has worked, man. But it's been fun. I've been very dedicated to the written word through it all. I know I do like I've done multiple video things and all that, but the written word was always where it was like the golden center of it all, and that's really what gets me going, man. So I've kept that centric to it. I've put my effort into that, and that's basically how I got here.
Yeah, and I think anyone that's watching this knows you for your written work. I think you know there's still great writers out there like yourself, like Sean Al-Shadi, like Dwayne Finley, that are doing the long forms, and there's still you know, an interest in that. There's so much to unpack what you said there. I wanted to actually go back like all the way back to the beginning, because I'm actually curious about this. Did you do any schooling? Like, you didn't mention any university or anything. Did you just go School of Hard Knocks, or did you actually go to a university?
I did go to, it was Metropolitan State University, which is in Denver, Colorado. That's where I grew up, and I went there, and I wrote for the paper called the Metropolitan. So it was like you know, it was just so I kind of did a little bit of everything there. I covered like a lot of their sports, but I also did music. That's where first wrote about music. They would the odd CD review, the odd, you know, somebody's playing, do you want to go check it out and write something about it, or do you want to preview something like that? So I was just picking up whatever they threw at me, man, and it was a lot of fun. I look back on those. Actually, I saved a couple of those, and I was looking back, and it's funny to look back on anything you wrote a long time ago, because you see yourself groping in the dark for to be a writer that maybe that you're reading at the time. You're trying to cull too many elements into what you want to do, and you just see a person who has no idea what they're doing in the end. But you have to go through those learning experiences, man, to really understand what you're, you know, how to get good at it, you know.
When you were a music writer, was it like Almost Famous? Like, did you have groupies and things like that? just going along, or like what was that like getting to, you know, go check out shows and stuff?
No, and that's one thing I did do a lot of, from maybe, you know, through into the early 2000s, man. I saw so many acts. I had stacks and stacks. At the time, CDs were still around. I had when I lived in New York City, I had to have a you know, a post box so I could go get my mail, because they couldn't deliver all the mail I would get to my little apartment, man. So I would bring, you know, those little mail bins. I would bring those mail bins every Wednesday or something like that. I'd go get everything that was sent me, and it would always be a whole bin of music. There was no way to listen to all of it. But it was it was really interesting. I developed many relationships. I got to know just about every genre of music, and I will say this: I was never a natural music guy. Like, you read, you know, I used to love Lester Bangs, and you wanted to think, well, if I'm going to write about music, I'm going to invent language. You know, I'm going to do these things. You realize how much context, and it's almost intuitive context, those guys, the really good music writers have. They have to kind of know almost a spiritual root of what this band is trying to accomplish through their influences and in the canon of what exists now. There's so much that goes into that I never had an organized brain to put together really good. I did some decent work in music, but I certainly wasn't, you know, I was not going to be another Lester Bangs. But I knew I could be a Lester Bangs in writing, and in fighting, I should say. In fighting, I knew I could be a Lester Bangs. I could do that in fighting, because it was afforded to me, and sports came very natural to me. Events speak to me. Like, you go to an event, there, you know, I see the poetry within what's happening in an event. I see two guys fighting. There's pretty much an endless amount of angle play you can go into something like that. You can choose to do anything with a fight. So I was really, you know, that's sports in general have been very easy for me to retain everything I know, and I have a huge context for sports, like everything that went back historically. But I didn't have that for music. So it was always a little bit of a fish out of water. I think I did okay, but I was never what I consider very good at it. You know what I mean?
But I think being in that situation too, you learned how to adapt to that situation. And in some ways in MMA, you have to do that when you're dealing with specific fighters too. So did you feel like having that background kind of paid dividends in this industry?
Oh man, mostly because you struggle, you know, you struggle with style, you struggle, you know, really it's nuance of, the nuances of being a writer more so than anything else, but it all plays into, in the end, your experience of what you do now. Like, everything I had to go through to get into, you know, fighting and, you know, kind of chronicling the fight game, you know, was, it all teaches you something, man. I mean, you're like every single aspect of it, how to approach a bigger story, you know, how to outline a story, because just things like that. What, you know, if you're writing a long form and you want to say, like, start with the spirit of the piece, you know, extract the very essence of what you want to be able to accomplish in the piece. And if you kind of do that, you adhere to it, everything kind of then goes around it. It all revolves around whatever the spirit of the piece is going to be. And I think all of that came from just those early days, man. Like just kind of picking up whatever, and you understood, you could distinguish very easily the things you cared about, the things you didn't, the things you couldn't do well, and the things you could. Like, but also just understanding your own process, how to write, how to sit down and write a story, how not to be intimidated by a blank page, you know what I mean, and how to tackle it. So I think that all of that stuff, I struggled, you struggle in certain things, and then it becomes that much. You pack it all in, you know how to like kind of flip through the things in your mind to say like, all right, here's what you do, and you figure those things out better. So more like that, more in an esoteric sense, and in a broader sense, I think that it all comes into play now.
Did you read a lot of books as a kid? I know even now, you still need to be up on, how to articulate things. And a lot of that comes with reading. And, we don't see a lot of people read these days. Was that a big part of your childhood, growing into everything else?
I wish I had read more, honestly, man. Like I look back on it and you think through your like formative years, if you're reading stuff rather than, watching too much TV and things like that, I would have loved to have, there's so many books out there I still haven't read. Let's put it that way. And it's a good thing to have, that you think at some point you should read them. Like there's this nagging, you should read these books, So the books I haven't read, I have a stack, I have stacks and stacks. Look, I'll even show you. Look at this.
Okay. Let's see. Oh,
like
wow.
All these, well, I mean, all those, there's a ton of books, and a lot of those little stacks, these are just my office, but those little stacks are just books. The one stack over there is books that I've just read. There's another stack of books that are meant to be read. So I kind of do this. I like stacking them up. There was an old Blaise Cendrars picture where he's standing there. He's got one arm after losing one in the war, and he's got like some like a snifter of cognac, and he's like these stacks of books, and he's taking a drink. And I always thought that was cool, to to be surrounded by books like that. So
of course,
I like it, man. I like being surrounded by them. I like reading them. And to answer your question, I wish I had read more. I did read books, growing up, but I didn't really get really heavily into reading books until I was a late teenager, man. I mean, and that's one of the regrets. I wish I'd started earlier, because there are a lot of good books out there, man. But there's only so much time you can read them in. So, but I've been reading since then, faithfully, you know what I mean? So I feel fairly well read at this point.
Yeah, and I think we can see that in your work, just very articulate, very detailed, and I think that comes with a lot of reading. I know Kareem Zidane is a good friend of mine. He preaches, read as much as you can if you're a writer,
yeah.
And I think that's very, very important. You talk a little bit about, going to university and everything like that. What about mentors? Who were some of the people early on that really you went to for advice, or maybe had had a look at your work? Was there anyone that stands out?
To be completely honest, we were talking about the unorthodox way that this all happened.
Yeah.
Not really.
Okay.
Because maybe it's because I would find myself falling into weird situations, or pursuing weird situations where maybe you were not, sort of unsolicited, to an extent. They didn't feel compelled. But even at the LA Weekly, for instance, and like I told you, there was an all-star cast of people over there. Those people were kind of, most of those writers were established, and a lot of them were kind of to themselves. Even the editors they had their favorites, and they weren't really that open to new enterprise. And I felt like I dealt with that a lot. And then there were a lot of people who, just through the process, I dealt with multiple editors who, I don't think that they were necessary. Maybe it's because I was starting too big in some ways with some of those magazines, but I don't think they were into the nurturing process too much. I think that they were kind of like, hey, if this thing, if they were going to change something or edit it, early on, I certainly wasn't even a part of some of the edits, and that is no way, obviously, for a writer to learn. I would say that for the most part, I've not hated, but I would say that I have held a certain amount of disdain for most editors I've dealt with coming up. But at some point along the way, man, like I believe it helped me anyway. Like, so in a strange way, just experience and just dealing with multiple editors, and not really, honestly, none of them in the early days, especially through the LA Weekly and through the glossy magazines out in New York. I just didn't feel like any of them would take the time to nurture. So in a weird way, it taught me when I became an editor how to better handle myself, you know, as an editor, as a writer, and how to deal with my, you know, the situations as they were, and how to kind of nurture writers around me, you know, like people asking me for advice. I take the time, I'll explain it, you know, I'll talk to them about my experience, and I will try to figure out what they're doing and help them with their piece, you know, or whatever they're doing. I didn't have a lot of that, to be honest. So it's kind of it's a weird thing. I know a lot of people, they swear by an editor, they get a great editor, and like, stick by those guys. I'm always envious when I hear those people, because I honestly have I've never been in that situation. And you get into our day and age now. I've got good editor, I've got good people around me, but people are just so busy, man. They're so busy and inundated with stuff. If you don't know what you're doing, you're not going to be nurtured now. So, and I don't, not that I'm asking for it, but I'm talking about even the young writers now. So all the editors I have now, it's more mind-boggling how much they have to juggle on a daily basis. And I certainly don't think that the editors of today, you know, MMA Fighting, Ringer, you know, people like that, are going to necessarily have a ton of time to want, you know, to bring people up. So it's a tough game, man. It's a tough game, but I think you stick with it. Like Kareem was telling you, man, you stick with it. You read a lot. If you read a lot, you learn that you can write better, you know, and I think that becomes your ultimate, compass on how to do it, you know?
What about now? I mean, I know you don't have mentors, but I'm sure, are there people that you speak with, whether it's editors that, you know, you kind of bounce ideas off of when you're writing like a long form or anything like that? Is there anyone like that?
Oh, sure, man. I mean, anything that goes through the ringer, it's a pitch process still. You know, you pitch it. You know, my guy over there, and you know, a lot of times he'll run up the flagpole with the true decision makers, which sometimes is Bill Simmons, or sometimes it's Sean Fennessy, the editor in chief. So it goes all the way up to that rank. You know, it's like anything I do for them is basically a pitch by pitch basis. But they're very good about, you know, they know what I can do. So that in most cases they're like, yeah, if you think you can do it, just do it. It's a very simple process with MMA Fighting. And it's been a little bit since I've done like a long form, but yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. I'll be talking to, because you have to coordinate a lot of times too, getting photographers, and if they want video of anything, like if you're trying to truly make an interactive experience, you got to kind of coordinate all those elements. And then sometimes there's travel involved and all that stuff. So it's a process where I'll throw an idea out there and see if you can get it. Like, can you get access to so and so? And if I believe I can, you know, you go through the process of talking to you know, the editor and seeing if he'll approve it, you know, and if he does that, then it becomes, okay, what's the next step? And from there, you know, you go on and on. So I mean, it's still a process, man. But I will say that it's harder and harder in these days to write a long form piece. For one, you know, you see the model, man. There's just everybody's cranking out material now, and you know, there is a big influence on video. There's you know, I think people are going more to video, and they are going to more quick hit stuff, trying to extract smart from, you know, to give like smart things in small bursts rather than these long, thoughtful pieces. Long form still exists, though. I just think that, you know, and it still thrives. Honestly, there's been so many good pieces of late that I've read. They're just really good stuff, but it's tough to say, hey, I want to be out of commission to write something long form, because you can't just throw them together, man. You know, you got to spend some time on them. So realistically, I think the big hurdle now is justifying writing a long form, you know. And I hate that it's that way, but I think that that's really how it's gotten. You have to kind of justify writing something longer, but ultimately, man, that's where you distinguish yourself. That's where you truly, that's where you show that what you can truly do, when you have to take a lot of elements and make something out of it. And I've enjoyed that, but I haven't tried it in a while, only because there's a billion other things going on at once. And, you know, every day there's something to be writing or doing. And it's just, you know, you read some people, like for the New Yorker, for instance, or the New York Times, and you realize, yes, they might be concurrently working on multiple stories, but they get maybe a 6-month window a lot of times to write a single story, you know, and I'm like, that's unheard of in the MMA space. So that's not going to be happening anytime soon. Yeah.
No, I agree. We talked a lot about, you know, what it took to get to where you are now and everything like that. I know a lot of times you have your salad years, as I like to call them. You know, you can basically make enough to afford a salad. What are some of the jobs, you referenced some of them there, but what were some of the jobs you were doing before you were doing this full time, like to pay the bills and everything, keep the lights on?
Let's see. Well, waiting tables was definitely one. Bartending, like more restaurant industry stuff, man. that was pretty much that was I would say that that was the bulk of it. I certainly had some other weird little odd jobs, you know, construction, like early on, like doing construction work and things like that. But that's pretty much it. Since I've been, you know, since I like going back to when we discussed, as soon as I realized I wanted to write and be around that atmosphere, basically, I pretty much adhered to that. But I've worked there. I worked at the airport at one point. As a rampage, you know, marshaling in airplanes and all that stuff.
Oh,
That
wow.
was kind
Okay.
of fun. Yeah, back in the day, that was a lot of fun. And got flight benefits and all that stuff. But that's about it, man. I mean,
Okay.
they're probably little things, but nothing serious. I think I'd say the bulk of the experience was like in restaurant work, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. You do all types of jobs just to make it work, as they say.
Yeah.
You're a family man now. How is that, you know, going through this whole process, trying to have a social life and balance everything? Because you're working weird hours, you know, you're up late, you're up early, whatever. And again, you're working a lot because, like you said, you have the, you know, the day job, and then you're doing all this stuff on the side as well before you get the full-time job.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, there's so much that goes into it, honestly, because I work from home too, and I have worked from home for a while. Like I haven't, you know, I go into New York City once a week for the MMA beat, and then you travel occasionally to the shows. I travel a lot less than I used to, which I actually am. I've come at first I was a little bit bothered by it. I wanted to be on the road more, but now I'm sort of like, this is perfect for me to only go out on big shows type thing. But when I was traveling a lot, you miss. I mean, it's tough, man. It's tough. I don't know. You know, I know guys like John Morgan. You know, he's a father, and you see his travel schedule, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how he does it, man. I'm like, and John Anik too. John Anik, and he always talks about like leaving his family and going to these far off corners of the world. You know, like Perth and down to South America multiple times. You know, a year. A lot of travel, man, and I'm not sure how those guys do it. I don't think I could personally do that, but working from home obviously has its challenge. It's challenging, especially during the summer, because now you know the kids are home, so you got to kind of keep them busy. You got to keep them busy, and you got to you got to keep yourself rolling along. And so I honestly, man, it's almost like a natural compartmentalization process with how to do it. Like you realize you got to be very efficient when you sit down at your computer. So a lot of times my mornings being the best time for me to write, I get up, write the piece I have to, especially if it's a column or something that's an opinion, write that, get it out of the way, and then kind of deal with, you know, what's going on in the household, and then maybe later on return and do whatever else you got to do. You know, so I kind of break it up a little bit. And I'm really, honestly, man, I'm thankful for that I'm able to do that.
Yeah.
Because you know, a lot of people, I can't imagine if I was going into an office every day, like how that would work. I was never cut out for that sort of thing, but I have done it in my life when I was editing the papers and stuff like that. But ultimately, I'm happy with my. It's nice to be able to be at home and have the chance to juggle all this. So I'm always thankful for that, man. Rather than just missing out on everything that goes on with your family. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. How early are you up? You strike me as like a 5 a.m. guy.
No. 5 a.m. going to sleep sometimes from no drinking. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not I'm not much of a morning person, but if I know you know, if I know I'm writing a column, I get up early and I'll write the column. I just find that it's better to wake up and whatever you put on your brain, you know, before you went to bed, it's ready to come out in whatever way it's going to. So I get up early if I know I've got to write something, but ultimately, not too early. It's not like a 5 a.m. is too early. You know, maybe 6:30, 7 o'clock type of guy to get up to write a piece. It just depends too on, like, especially if it's MMA fighting, you know, when they want to run it. If they want to run something at 9 a.m., obviously I'm up very early writing it. If it's not going till 11, you could sleep a little longer and then get up and write it. So it's just all, you know how it is, man. Like it's all just circumstantial on that.
You seem universally liked in this industry, and that's tough to do. You know, we see a lot of people, whether, you know, you give any sort of opinion. I mean, you know, your colleague there, Luke Thomas, is a prime example, you know, very opinionated and gets, you know, a bit of both. You know, people really like his opinions, other people don't. How have you been able to navigate through that, especially with social media and everything? Do you get people giving negative comments? Because I don't think I've ever seen anyone complain about anything you've ever done.
Really?
Yeah,
I've never seen anybody complain to me.
No,
Crazy.
I've never really seen it, like, compared to some of the other guys that you see out there, you know?
I know what you mean by that, though. You know, I've actually thought about that. And then, you go into another, mode of thinking, which is, am I playing it too middle of the road? Am I not really expressing true opinion? Like, you go through this process of like, maybe I need to be, not that I'm necessarily trying to have people hate me, or love me. I really to be completely honest, man, I think that part of something I learned early on was just to stay very even keel about things. So there have been times, you haven't seen it, but there have been plenty of times where people have come at me for various reasons, and behind the scenes too, fighters, managers, whatever it is. And I can't really, I guess I try not to let that affect me. Just like if you write a good piece and you're hearing nothing but glowing things about it, I try not to let that affect me. I just try to keep each thing you do is completely unique to what you're doing. You want to do it the best you can, and I just block out all the other stuff. Now, if you're talking about just dealing with people on social media and stuff like that, basically, I just honestly restraint.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it comes down to restraint because some people can't help themselves. I think honestly, when people are coming at them to go back to those people. A lot of times my natural instinct is either to, and there's plenty of times I've been mad, I fired off, whatever I'm going to fire off at them. But there's a lot of times there's a peacemaker in me, or there's just a sound logical thing that's like, we're human beings. Why are we going to have this ridiculous hateful kind of exchange? And you try to change that. You try to change the tone of it. I've consciously been like that. Social media has been it's been as cool as it can be, like one of the coolest things that have come, and it's also been the most soul-sucking, crazy invention ever, man. I mean, and it's literally, sometimes you're looking at it through your fingers type thing. And I just try to, honestly, man, I never wanted to be a guy who's just on there causing trouble. And I'd also I don't want to be on there throwing my opinions around on every single thing that happens. I just think restraint, to be honest with you, man. Like if I think of a word, I would say that having the restraint to not overdo it on there. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if I am loved, man, if that's true, and I honestly, it's very difficult to gauge sometimes as how things work in this industry or when you're out in the world like that. That's good to know. That's good to know, man. Because really you want the respect of your colleagues, and I've been I was an early advocate of MMA in terms of all the people around it and embracing the people who are, because we all built this game. We all built the media and the game around it together, and I feel like I don't forget that, man. I know most guys in the media and kind of what they've done individually to take it to where it is. Yourself included, man. You've done great work with all this stuff, and I try to let people know. I try to let people know, man. Honestly, I try to let them know and push it. Help push it. Show, like a lot of times, if I know I'm doing something good, I hope that it helps other people see that it's good, that they want to push themselves to do something better. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I feel like that's part of it.
Well, I was just going to say, and I think that's the positive side of social media. There is a group, there's lots of people who are, going to help each other out. I've gotten interviews because people have helped me out, or vice versa. I'm a big believer, and myself as well. Giving back. I think that's important too. Where if you keep working, I think what you put out there, you're going to get back in return, right? Whatever that is, whatever spiritual thing you want to call that. That is what it is. Whatever. Yeah. People obviously see you on the MMA beat all the time. What was that like when you first got that call to be on camera? Because I know you said it right there when we were talking about MMA Live. You just want to stick to writing, but you're very strong on air, and I believe that you're very like I said, universally liked in that regard. How was that transition? Just getting to be on camera and doing it all the time.
It was weird, man, because growing up when I did, you were right. If you were trying to be a writer, and I'm not that old. It's happened it's just happened in our lifetime. It's happened in this thing where if you can't do multiple things, maybe you're not as valuable to any employer as the other guy. And I think that at some point, you better know how to do a little bit of lots of things, and I kind of honestly looked at it like that. Some people really, really herald being on TV or being in these. I don't, man. I really don't. For the most part, I don't want nothing to do with it. But as things went on, especially when I went to ESPN, I knew obviously, like, if you're at ESPN, there's a likelihood they're going to have, I'm in Connecticut. There's a likelihood they're going to have you come in and sit before a camera at some point and do this stuff. Fortunately for me, they kind of did it slowly. where I was going in for like little web hits, just dissecting fights or whatever it was. What'd they call it? It was like MMA Live, like extra or something weird like that. It was
Yeah.
just these little 5 minute, if it was that, like 3 minute type things. I did some of those, and it was fairly painless. I had done, let me just put it this way, that wasn't my first forays into television or being on screen. I had done that stuff for years here and there, but I'd turned down a lot of that stuff too. I remember when I was at IE Weekly, um, is it no reservations, or what was the first Bourdain show? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like,
Oh, yeah, I believe. Yeah,
no reservations.
I think so. Yeah.
They had called up because I was the editor over there. They called up and they wanted to do, he would always have people on the show to basically show them around on some level and kind of give them a little bit of a contextual history of the area. And they wanted to do that IE week, and they called me. And I remember thinking like, it's not for me. That's not who I. So just to give you an idea, like I think a lot of people would have completely jumped at the situation to go do that, but I wasn't really like that. But I had done plenty. I'd done plenty of radio things, etc. I've been in the, it's not really a public. It's not like I'm afraid to speak in public, or things like that, or talk. I'm not afraid to look like a moron or any of that stuff. So it's just more I don't prefer it. I just want to be known as a writer. So, when at ESPN, I knew that process was probably going to happen. I did it a few times. It didn't really, it was fairly, you're working with pros, and it was kind of harmless. And so as the show MMA Live came back and they were starting a new iteration, they were like, hey, you're right here, would you want to be like a regular talking head on the show? And, I talked to them about that, and they had Pat Miletich involved, and then they had Jorge Rivera come in. And I remember like you'd be stupid to pass it up, man. I mean, and besides that, I think that like I told you, you kind of have to do this stuff. I felt like it's an obligation, but it's also, so it's an obligation that you have to look at as like, it's fun, And
Yeah.
so I just started to do it. It wasn't too hard for me, to be honest, man. Like, because I've watched ESPN my whole life, and I've watched shows like, even the MMA Beat, the sports reporters basically did that template. It's, you watch guys communicate in a panel discussion, you kind of know what you're doing. You try to add your own little flares to it and stuff like that. But ultimately, I don't lose much sleep about it, man. I just kind of show up and make sure I'm informed enough to hang in those situations, and to insider enough, I guess, when I was at ESPN, insider enough to offer a little bit of, true insight into what was happening into the realm that we were talking. You know what I mean? So it's been fun, honestly. Nowadays, I don't really think as much about it, but I always protect the idea that I'm a writer first.
Yeah, I remember first ever like seeing any of your stuff on ESPN, and I can't remember if I told you this or not, but I used to work at TSN here in Canada, which is the Canadian ESPN, and so we used to have to put MMA Live on our site. We actually used to have to get the videos and bring them up. So I remember like Anik being on there and stuff. So it's kind of interesting that you're bringing all this up, just because I remember having to. I was the only guy in the digital team at the time who was like cared at all about MMA. So anytime we get any sort of content, I was like, let's get it on here, So it was
fun. It was fun back then, especially because we're talking about maybe 2011 when I want to say it was 2011 maybe when that show was running. We were still in the period when there was a lot of holdover diehards who believed that they were the superior knowledge of the sport. So anything that you might trip up on, they were sure to tell you. They were going to call you a noob, and they were going to so it's like anything that you got wrong, or any piece of history that you might have been unfamiliar with. Oh, when did you start following the sport during Tough One? It was like I had to deal with that immensely back then, man. Like people just all the time. And I'm like, the truth of the matter was, a lot of us, including Brett Okamoto, including John Anik, we're not following the sport like those diehards were all the way back to 1993,
Yeah.
I certainly knew of the sport. I didn't know every detail of its history, and I didn't start watching, I wasn't watching every event. I was certainly watching the Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz and that sort of stuff, but I wasn't watching every event, man. So there was a process of going back and making sure you understood the history of the sport. And I've done that in so many ways now. I feel like I've known the sport the whole way, because you've had to revisit everything so much. But I remember you were talking about the TV side of it. That was kind of just a general fear, I think, for anybody at ESPN at the time. Chad Dundas too. I remember just all these guys. I think there was a little bit of like because Josh Gross knew a lot, and he was there. was a little intimidating going on his podcast or something like that, because you'd be like, he may strike into something that you just don't know enough
Right.
about, and he's going to expose your stupid, you have no background, like you're always worried about that sort of thing. And I think that was just kind of a low flame fear at the back of everything back then.
Yeah.
And obviously I don't really. The sport has changed so much, and so many people are into it, and there's a collective idea, and there's so many different evolutions, and the history itself has blossomed and evolved in so many ways that I don't really worry about that anymore, man. But I remember back then that being a big deal.
How long is that drive from Connecticut to New York? I've always wondered that.
So I generally don't. I drive to a train station, which is about 25 minutes where I'm at, and then it's about from where I come from, it's about maybe an hour and a half, all told. Like, so, and we switched offices. Now we're down near Battery Park, like down in that area of Manhattan. So I have to take a subway once I'm there. So all told, now it's a little over maybe 2 hours to 2 hours and 15 minutes. And then I'm there. So it's a little bit of a commute on the Thursdays, but not bad, man. I mean, when it was beforehand, we used to do it over, and it was more in Midtown. So you'd show up at Grand Central, and Jeff Wagenheim and I, a lot of times, Wags would take the train in with me, and we just walk over there, and it was very, very simple. But there's that extra layer now, but it's not bad.
Yeah, it's like Toronto too. Like you take the GO train. Usually, most people live in the burbs. You take the GO train, then you take the subway. It's the same sort of thing. These big cities, you can't. It makes it a lot easier just to take the public transportation a little bit there.
I love it. I love it, man. I love. Ultimately, it's a commuter train. It's not exactly the most relaxing ride, but at the same time, man, you got like an hour and a half. Something like between an hour and 15 minutes, depending on which train you're on, and an hour and a half, and it's just time to kind of sit and think. And how often do you get to do that? How often do you get to do that these days? So I still enjoy it. It still feels like a very old school thing to be doing.
Do you ever bring a book on there, or is that too tough just with everything around? Oh, you do? Okay, good. Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's probably a good time.
Yeah, that's a prime time to be reading. And when I was going into the city more often, man, I was plowing through books. I kind of miss that because it is an opportunity without distraction, really. I mean, you can kind of tune out the people around you, and you can read as much as you want on the train, man. It's a good place to do it.
We're going to wrap things up here in a little bit. And again, I want to thank you so much for the time. Just looking back at all the long form pieces you've done, is there one that stands out to you that you're really like, man, that was like one of my favorite things to do? Because for me personally, I love the Jason Thacker one. That for me was like just going deep on that, because Tough One was the first, that's what got me into the sport, was watching that season. And Thacker's actually from British Columbia, where I grew up. So it's interesting.
Oh, I didn't know that you grew up out there.
Yeah, I grew up in Vancouver, so not obviously where he lives, way out north. But I remember when he was on the show, I was like, "Oh, there's a Canadian on here. He's from BC. That's pretty cool." But is there a personal favorite for you that you're looking back?
That one particularly was. I like that one a lot for a lot of reasons. One, because intuitively, I kind of knew that would be the case. I really had a feeling all these years. I was like, he's disappeared on purpose. I'd ask about him all the time. Nobody knew where he was. I was like, he's disappeared on purpose. Something happened like to him, and he hated it, and he wanted to get away. So finding him, discovering his situation, and talking to him, I think that it was a human being. It's a human story. So I felt like that was like that one stands out the most, honestly. But like, if I'm thinking about which one I loved in terms of I guess tying the pieces together and figuring it out, it'd probably be, I did one on Douglas Crosby, the judge, and it's not nearly as known. I feel like I think it's because people have such an adverse reaction to him. They don't really like him, but it was just it was a lot, man, because I had to go hang out with him on multiple occasions in New York, and always in very strange situations. He's driving me around, going to like costume shops. Another time we're in like a Russian spa, like we're in a Russian spa, like, and he's talking about, and this is where he finally talks to me about judging. We're in like this hot tub, and he's like, and I'm gonna have to break my recorder out, like hoping it doesn't get wet. And I kind of feel like sometimes he murks up stuff on purpose. But then there was this whole like fact versus fiction with the man, and it required every bit of your BS detector to get to that, but it also required, you had to kind of treat him sincerely too, because I felt like there was there was both of those were in full evidence the whole way, and it was just really, really, really bizarre because you had to sift through so many layers and not come across like you got duped. You know what I mean? Like, because I
Yeah.
think that there was certainly an element of that. Like, there was a lot of just strange behavior. I had to sift through that. I decided the way I wrote it was just kind of pointing out all of that, all the quirk and everything else, and just tying all those elements in with the letting the looniness of the situation go its own direction, but always kind of bringing it back to some central point. I thought I did a really good job on that one, to be honest. So I would say that that one is my favorite in terms of if I go back and read it. I think I think it was called "Left in the Hands of the Judge" or something like that,
Mhm.
and that one was probably my favorite.
Yeah, no, I do remember that one actually. Now that you bring it up, yeah,
Yeah,
I remember a lot of twists
it
and turns in that. Yeah.
compared to like did one called the Eagles of Bettendorf, where I went and visited the Cats out in Bettendorf and did this big piece about their team right before Robbie Lawler won the title. And that piece I remember was like, I felt like the reason that piece did so well is because I don't think many people knew I was really a writer. I just think that all of a sudden, like, who's this? That was one of the first ones. And then the Thacker one obviously was like that one got a lot of fanfare, and there was multiple. I was, I mean, I was every day people were like, come on the radio, do all this stuff. It was that was probably the biggest response I ever got. Comparatively, the Douglas Crosby one came out, and I felt like it got maybe a tenth of the attention of those. But I thought I kind of knew it was going to be for a very specific kind of audience. Maybe it wouldn't travel as well, but I did think that one came out really well.
What big thing that obviously happened at your site with MMA Fighting, Ariel Helwani leaving and going to ESPN. Have things changed at all just with your day-to-day or things like that, or does that not even affect you at all?
It does affect, I mean, it affects things for sure, because there's been like I will say this, when he dropped that bomb that he was going to leave, there was, I think, some internal pondering going on, like, so what does this mean? Because obviously so many people recognize Ariel Helwani as the site itself. I think that a lot of people thought he ran it. I think a lot of people thought he owned it. You realize that after a while. Like, I didn't realize how many people were really misguided as to what was going on there, that it was a Vox Media thing. It's actually a very big company and a good company. They're doing great, but he was a big part of it, and he brought MMA fighting to where it is, and I think that people really identified that. So you lose basically the face of the organization. Mm-hmm. I will say, though, that they've assembled the cast they've assembled there. I always thought it was a really pretty all-star cast, man. I mean, and everybody kind of fit a need. You mentioned Sean El Shadi. The guy is very versatile. He can do so much. Luke Thomas with his abilities, and Mark Raimondi, and it goes on and on. Esther and Casey. Those guys, they're just so good at what they do, etc. All those guys are really resilient, man. And it took a couple of weeks, and I was not involved in all the internal discussions as to what, how are we going to handle all this and all that. But when I finally kind of heard from the rest of the team, and I understood, it was a very positive vibe. I felt like people were going to be resilient. There was a little defiance, like, hey, man, we're not going to let that define us now. We're going to see how we can fix this. And they went about, talking to Luke, getting him, I guess, to take over the Monday show, and then the MMA Beat. I didn't know what was going to happen. People were asking a million times. I'm like, I don't know what's happening with MMA Beat. As soon as I knew that was going to continue, it was, it was not much. I mean, you can't replace a guy like that. So I guess you just basically you pick up and you hope that you fill in on any essential level you can. And there's other stuff in the works. I don't know if I'm at liberty to really talk about, but there's other stuff in the works that I think will also help in that process. You know what I mean? And we'll see. But I think over time, we'll see kind of how it really affected us over time. But so far, man, I feel like everybody's been resilient, and we've kind of picked up right where we were. I don't really sense that big of a difference, to be honest.
When Ariel left, was this something you knew was coming, or did this come out of left field?
Well, I know Ariel.
Yeah,
I know Ariel really. I know him really well, and I think that I had a discussion with him before it was public, for sure. Like, it was, I knew maybe a couple weeks beforehand. I just talked to him, and I basically told him, like, you know, man, the guy's great. He's done everything. Like most of the people in MMA fighting would probably attribute their success in large part to what Ariel, maybe bringing him in, giving him the exposure. That's what he does, man. He's an amazing colleague in that sense. He's always on top of it, man. And he says something like that, and you're like, I could tell he was very nervous, you know, to be going over there, not because he didn't think he could succeed, but right after he agrees to do it, you know, right after he agreed to go to ESPN, UFC then became a partner with ESPN, and I think he was really worried, you know, that something might go wrong there that he didn't anticipate, or things like that. So he had his worries, but you know, he went back and forth, and then he was the face of the organization at MMA Fighting, and he was very, you know, with everybody involved all the way to the top. He's been a big mainstay, and he knows, you know, the people at the very top too. So it's like, I think it was just hard for him to do it, but he felt he needed to do it, you know, and he brought it up, and I kind of basically did what he did, you know, he did for me. Multiple times I told him, like, you know, man, you got to do what you if it's your dream to go to ESPN, you got to follow your dream, man. I'm like, you got to do it. You can't let other people be, you can't let other people kind of dictate what you should and shouldn't be doing. And I felt like maybe I helped him in one little way to kind of feel better about it. But I had to be happy for him in the end, man. It sucks when you're a teammate of his and stuff like that, but you have to be happy for him in the end because, and it seems like he's doing great over there, man. Like, so yeah. I'm like, you just got to, like, guys like that, you got, you know, if they get an opportunity, you just got to say, hey, best of luck, go get it, you know.
As we wrap things up here, what's the best advice you could give anyone watching that wants to do what you're doing? You know, being a long form writer, what advice would you give?
I would consume every piece of, you know, read as much as you can, but consume. If you want to write long form, for instance, if you want to write features, read tons of features and tons of long forms and see what you like about it. Like, think of it from a construction standpoint. How would I put something like this together? And just do that, man. I mean, honestly, like, you're going to have to practice, and you're going to have to make sure you got a good story. A lot of people want to just throw, I'm going to write 7,000 words on a story that deserves maybe 700, you know. Yeah. That's not a long form. That's just you know, I don't know what that is. The internet is full of that kind of crap. And I'm like, don't do that. Yeah. Make sure that you have a story, but then also know what you're doing. I guess that would be the whole thing. And my big suggestion, honestly, is just know the public. Like, if you're trying to get into it, know the place. If you're trying to write a big feature for some specific place, know their style, know what they like, you know. Know the outlet first. And if the outlet seems like a perfect spot for you to do something, then make sure that you know your story. And the way you do that, honestly, like I tell, just like you're saying with Kareem, man, I'm like, read as much as you can, because I believe if you just soak in, you know, a million things, you soak in a million articles and you just keep reading them, eventually you feel like you know how to do it, you know. I know it's not the same, but it certainly helps, man. It certainly helps to read a lot, and then just basically keep practicing. Just keep hammering the keys, man. Get like a journal where you're the only one who will ever see it, and just pounding that thing is daily. I've done that for years and years. I'll just get in there and just dump mine, you know, just whatever comes across and what's been happening and et cetera, and it helps, man. Like, just stuff like that, you just start to form habits, and you start to see things differently. So just keep doing it and read.
That's some great advice. And Chuck, this was awesome. It's always good talking to you, man. Next time, hopefully, you'll be over drinks. Are you coming to Toronto in December for the UFC card? Because I know you came to Toronto last time.
I think so, yeah. I usually make the Toronto one. So, yeah, if I don't see you sooner, man, I'll definitely see you. Are you coming to MSG? That's the question.
Am I what, sorry?
Are you coming to MSG in November?
Oh, MSG. That's I got to look. I'm in the process of moving. Okay. Yeah, that might be a little difficult, but I got to twist the wife's arm a little bit, because if McGregor's on that card, how do you miss that one, right? So. Oh,
for sure. Well, I'll see you there if that's the case, but otherwise, I will see you in Toronto, man. And I appreciate you having me on, man. This is fun.
Yeah, no, it's good. Getting some good insight there. Just remind people, anything you want to plug, anything you got coming up, any social media you want to get out there. The floor is yours, sir.
I mean, I'm not much for plugging, but I mean, bottom line is that you can find me on Twitter. That's probably the best place to find me. Is just at Chuck Mindenhall. It's just my name. So come say hello over there.
Perfect. And everyone, we should be back next Thursday with another edition of the MMA Industry Podcast. I want to thank all of you for watching. Follow me on Twitter at Lynch on Sports, and we'll see you next week. Thanks everyone for watching.